Hello, this is the Global News podcast from the BBC World Service, with reports and analysis from across the world. The latest news 7 days a week. BBC World Service podcasts are supported by advertising.
This is the Global News podcast from the BBC World Service. I'm Jonathan Savage, and in the early hours of Thursday, the 6th of February, these are our main stories. US President Donald Trump has been acquitted of all impeachment charges. The World Health Organization asks for nearly $700 million to help developing countries prepare for the coronavirus, which has killed nearly 500 people. And the UN Security Council will hold an emergency session on Syria as the crisis in Idlib worsens. Also in this podcast, scientists complete a landmark study on cancer, shedding new light on which are the best treatment methods. And has climate change bridged the gap between the left and right?
Well, we have to say the conservative world is a little bit green also. And I think now it's a very good government programme.
Yes, how Austria might be leading the way in new forms of political coalitions. We start in Washington, where members of the United States Senate have voted to acquit President Trump of abusing his power and obstructing Congress. Senators split along party lines, meaning prosecutors failed to gain the two-thirds majority in the chamber necessary to remove Mr. Trump from office.
The Senate, having tried Donald John Trump, President of the United States, upon 2 articles of impeachment exhibited against him by the House of Representatives, and 2/3 of the senators present not having found him guilty of the charges contained therein, it is, therefore, ordered and adjudged that the said Donald John Trump be, and he is hereby, acquitted of the charges in said articles.
Mr. Trump had been impeached by the House of Representatives for allegedly pressurising Ukraine to investigate his political rival, the Democratic presidential hopeful Joe Biden. The result comes as no surprise. The Republicans, who hold the majority of seats in the Senate, have said throughout that they would stand by the president. Our correspondent Gary O'Donoghue is in Washington.
We had predicted this all along, that he would be acquitted on these 2 articles of impeachment, and that's exactly what's happened. It's been straight down party lines, apart from 1 vote on 1 of the articles, and that was Mitt Romney, the Republican from Utah, the former Republican presidential candidate, who voted to convict Donald Trump on the whole business of abuse of power. That's the only vote out of line in political terms. Some immediate reaction, the Trump campaign, that's the election campaign, said that it had been a total vindication of the president. They attacked the Democrats. They said it was a huge miscalculation, the biggest miscalculation in history. And the president has tweeted the most curious thing on social media. I encourage you all to take a look at it. It's a sort of mock-up of a front cover of Time magazine, you know, the very famous US news magazine. It's a mock-up of their front cover with the president on it, and it's got a sort of date on this video that goes up and up and up and up and up and up, right into the late part of the 21st century, and eventually it just says Trump forever, 4 EVA. Quite an extraordinary reaction from the president, nothing official yet from the White House.
Yeah, if not forever, then he'll hope for at least 4 more years. What does this signify for Donald Trump in an election year?
Well, it's a huge victory, and it's a huge boost, if you like, for him. It's something that's not only a kind of vindication in legal terms, and of course this was a sort of quasi-legal stroke political process, but also in campaign terms, it gives him something big to talk about on the campaign trail. This allows him, if you like, to renew and reinvigorate the idea that he is the outsider. That's what he ran on last time, and he can now go on his campaign trail and say, look, the establishment, Washington, the Democrats, tried to get rid of your guy. They didn't want you to have the choice to vote for him. You know, the outsider is back again. I think that's the kind of message I'd be surprised if you didn't hear from him in the coming months at those rallies.
And the Democrats knew they had very little chance of success with this action. So what could they gain and what have they risked?
Well, I mean, on the face of it, their argument has always been, look, if you do something impeachable, you should be impeached. Whatever your chances of being convicted are politically. That's the sort of high-minded argument they've usually trotted out. They will be hoping that what has been exposed by the process will persuade, will sway some of those key swing voters in the suburban areas, those college-educated women who have been, were voting for Donald Trump and maybe moving away from Donald Trump. Some of those people in those key states where the battle will be won, hoping that they will be swayed by what they've heard and what behaviour they've heard by the president. We just don't know what impact it's going to have. It could carry huge risks with it for the Democrats. It could be seen by the voters as vindictive, as unnecessary, as a distraction, if you like, from governing the country. The election result will be the final verdict on that.
Gary O'Donoghue in Washington. After appeals for calm and then appeals for control, the latest appeal is for cash. The World Health Organization is asking for $675 million to help developing countries prepare for the possible arrival of the new coronavirus. The WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus said it was better to invest now than pay much more later.
$675 million is a lot of money, but it's much less than the bill we will face if we do not invest in preparedness now during the window of opportunity that we have.
Passengers on 2 cruise ships docked in Asian waters, one in Japan and the other in Hong Kong, have been placed in quarantine after a number of people on each ship tested positive for the virus. British tourist David Abel is among them. He says it's no longer a holiday.
We were informed by the captain that every passenger had to remain in their cabins. We can't leave the cabin, walk along the corridor. We've got no idea when we are going to be allowed off the ship. All we have been informed is 14 days quarantine. That means we've got no interaction with other passengers. Food is brought to the room. It's really basic food. Nothing like we've enjoyed on the cruise at all. It's changed so much.
Almost 500 people have died so far, and in the epicentre of the outbreak, Wuhan, the Chinese authorities are transforming sports arenas into makeshift hospitals. More than 74 million people are now subject to some form of travel restriction, with many unable to leave their homes. But as our China correspondent John Sudworth reports, questions remain about how the authorities are dealing with the crisis.
Wuhan is a city at war with an invisible enemy. Giant machines mounted on trucks spray disinfectant into the air. Elsewhere, workers on foot fumigate pavements and doorways. But its hospitals are still overwhelmed. Xiao Huang spent days fighting to get his sick granddad a bed in a hospital corridor, but it was too late. He now fears his grandmother is dying too. If they'd been admitted earlier, of course things would have been better, he tells me. One woman who doesn't want to be identified tells me her uncle won't be counted in the official statistics because he died before he could be tested for the virus. There are so many cases like his, she says. All of this might have been prevented. In mid-January, the authorities staged a massive banquet, even though they knew the virus was spreading fast. The economy and political stability placed ahead of public health. There are some signs the restrictions may be having an effect. Outside Hubei, the worst affected province, the rate of increase in infections is slowing slightly. But fighting this virus is a massive task, and China faces a long struggle yet.
John Sudworth. President Xi Jinping has urged law enforcement agencies to do more to strengthen epidemic controls in parts of Hubei and Zhejiang provinces. At present, only one person per household is allowed to go out every 2 days to buy necessities, an order that affects millions. But as our China media analyst Kerry Allen told me, not everyone is obeying the government's instructions.
There have been a number of cases in the last 24 hours that have been all over the media about people faking the fact that they've come from Wuhan or from Hubei province where this coronavirus started. So, for example, they've been giving other information or they've been getting on different trains to different locations and then diverting. And the government has been saying that you will be punished, and a number of people already have been given between 10 and 15 days administrative jail sentences just because they haven't said where they're coming from.
Do people have to stay at home all the time? Because I imagine there's grocery shopping to be done, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I remember early on when there was a lot of panic over cities in lockdown in Hubei province, but I was speaking to friends in Shanghai that wasn't in lockdown, but basically, effectively, people were in lockdown because people feel they can't go out without a mask. They're worried that this virus might spread. They're worried about the stigma that comes from not wearing a mask, that you're not seen as being hygienic. So a lot of places all over China, after this virus started developing, people were just not going out whatsoever. Especially if they couldn't buy a mask because they were in such hot demand that they couldn't go out. So yeah, people are very much concerned. They don't want to go out onto the streets. And even though some areas have said, for example, if you've got work or school, you've got to go to school, they've suspended the time for these restarting.
So how are people filling all this time they're now spending inside their own homes?
And they've got a lot of it, yeah. People are struggling because originally as well there was a lot of entertainment, TV programming, but because of this virus, the government did say early on that it was going to cancel a lot of these TV programs that people were expecting and devote more coverage to the coronavirus so that people felt that they could be kept informed. This has now been a number of weeks that people are very much stuck with nothing to do. And people have been increasingly